Coming up today, President Park Geunhye is set to meet with her Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the G20 Summit in Hangzhou. They're going to talk the economy, North Korea and the controversial deployment of THAAD. South Korea's rival political parties will set out their policy goals this week. First up is the ruling Saenuri Party. It's likely to focus on economic reforms. First, the government announces a slew of countermeasures aimed at lessening the impact of Hanjin Shipping's slide towards liquidation. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello to our viewers around the world. It's 6 a.m. on Monday, September 5th here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Mark Broom. We are going to start with the G20 Summit in China. The leaders of the most powerful countries in the world are gathered in Hangzhou to discuss ways to bring about inclusive economic growth through innovation. Speaking at the summit on Sunday, President Park Geunhye laid out South Korea's vision for building a future growth engine through creative economy. Our presidential office correspondent Song Ji-sun starts us off.
At this year's G20 Summit aimed at building a more innovative, invigorated, interconnected and inclusive world economy, President Park Geunhye proposed Korea's creative economy drive as a new model for growth to counter the so-called new normal of low growth now prevailing around the globe.
창의적 아이디어에 ICT를 비롯한 새로운 기술을 융합하고 기술과 혁신, 문화를 융합해서 새로운 시장과 일자리를 만드는 것이 한국 창조 경제의 핵심입니다. 창조 경제는 아이디어만 있으면 누구나 성공할 수 있는 기회가 있기 때문에 G20이 추구하는 포용적 성장과도 궤를 같이 합니다.
Park also emphasized Seoul's three-year economic innovation plan aimed at revamping labor, finance, education, and the public sector through reform, inviting G20 members to pursue structural reforms for growth.
구조개혁에서의 어려움을 극복할 수 있는 모범 관행을 만들고 실패 사례도 공유해서 타산지석으로 삼을 것을 제안합니다. 나비는 누에고치 속에 건더기 시절을 겪고 그 껍질을 뚫고 나오는 과정을 통해 날개가 힘을 얻어서 화려하게 날아오를 수 있습니다. 만약 나비가 나오기 쉽게 껍질을 뚫어주면 며칠 살지 못한다고 합니다.
At Monday's session, but will call for action from G20 members to promote free trade against rising protectionism, a message she's expected to stick with through this three-nation multilateral diplomacy trip. President Park Geunhye is also set for bilateral talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping on Monday, where the two sides are likely to discuss regional economic and security issues, including North Korea's nuclear threats and the deployment of THAAD missile defense system in South Korea. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News, Hangzhou.
Now, bringing back a strong level of economic growth was high on the agenda on the first day of the G20 Summit in China. For more on what was discussed, here's our Hanjin.
The two-day G20 summit kicked off on Sunday as the leaders of the world's biggest economies and the heads of international organizations like the UN and IMF came together in the picturesque Chinese city of Hangzhou. While last year's summit in Turkey focused on counter-terrorism, this gathering is taking a different angle, especially in light of the UK's decision to leave the European Union and the risks that poses to the world economy.
Leaders from across the world discussed issues centering on the economy, like the global low-growth trend and increased financial volatility.
At the opening, Chinese President Xi Jinping urged countries to boost policy coordination and avoid protectionism.
We should increase macroeconomics policy coordination, jointly promote global economic growth, and protect financial stability.
The first of 5 sessions was held on Sunday, with talks to continue on Monday on how to revive the currently anemic world trade volume. Also on the agenda will be global climate change. Before wrapping up, the world leaders will adopt a global communique. It's China's first time hosting the G20, and the country is determined to use the event to showcase its emergence as a global power. The G20 was formed in 1999 after the Asian financial crisis increased the need for world economies to work together. It's made up of the world's 19 economies plus the EU representing 85% of world GDP. Hwangji, Arirang News, Hangzhou.
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is also set to hold talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping on this Monday. Japan's Kyodo News Agency says the talks will follow the official conclusion of the two-day G20 summit in China. The discussions will most likely center on the territorial disputes surrounding the Japan-controlled Senkaku, China-claimed Diaoyu Islands in the East China Sea. It'll be the first one-on-one meeting since April 2015. Relations between Tokyo and Beijing have been tense as around a dozen Chinese Coast Guard and government ships have sailed near the islands over the last month. President Park Geunhye has officially appointed 3 new members of her cabinet and a Supreme Court justice. The president's former secretary for political affairs and a former gender equality minister, Cho Yun-seon, is now Minister for Culture, Sports and Tourism. Opposition parties had objected to Cho's appointment, citing an alleged lack of transparency in her income and for ethical reasons. But the National Assembly's approval is not legally required for the president to make the appointment. President Park's new agriculture minister is Kim Jae-soo, her environment minister Jo Kyung-gyu, and her new justice on the Supreme Court is Kim Jae-hyung. Now, Korea's political parties are set to lay out their policy visions starting on this Monday in speeches by the leaders of the 3 major parties. The ruling Saenuri Party leader, Lee Jung-hyun, will speak at the National Assembly on Monday, focusing on policy reforms. The newly elected head of the Minju Party of Korea, Choo Mi-ae, will give a speech the next day. And Park Ji-won of the People's Party's turn comes on Wednesday. Now, the opposition parties are expected to bring up the planned deployment of the US missile defense system THAAD and the corruption scandal involving senior presidential secretary for civil affairs, Woo Byung-woo. A South Korean law designed to promote human rights in North Korea took effect on Sunday. The bill, which was held up in the National Assembly for 11 years, calls for Seoul's Unification Ministry to set up a foundation center and to hold other projects that will focus on supporting North Korean defectors and resolving issues over families separated by the Korean War. The Unification Ministry expects the law to systemize projects to improve human rights in North Korea that have been conducted in all different ways by different civic groups. North Korea has announced that it mobilized 100,000 people to mark the successful launch of its submarine-launched ballistic missile in August. The North state-run daily Nodong Shinmun reported Sunday that a large-scale welcoming ceremony was held in Pyongyang last Friday to acknowledge those who contributed to the missile launch. Prior to the ceremony, it said the scientists and engineers also toured the country for a few days and even took photos with leader Kim Jong-un. Thousands of North Koreans were also mobilized to congratulate those who carried out the regime's 4th nuclear test back in January. The South Korean government has announced some measures to cope with the demise of Hanjin Shipping, the country's biggest shipping company. 9 government ministries met on Sunday to discuss further countermeasures. Our Ian Shin has the details.
Officials from 9 government ministries met Sunday morning to try and assess the damage stemming from the collapse of Hanjin Shipping and come up with measures to limit its impact. They looked at the potential harm the sudden demise of the world's 7th largest shipping company could do to domestic and overseas businesses.
At this moment, what's of utmost importance is to ensure the safe arrival and unloading of all the shipments now underway. We're going to try our best and work with government agencies to minimize the damage. And for that, we also need Hanjin and other shipping and logistics companies to cooperate to the best of their ability.
The country's financial authorities are set to provide one-on-one counseling to businesses affected by delays among Hanjin's cargo vessels. For its part, the Korea Customs Service has announced it'll work in emergency mode around the clock and simplify clearance for cargo ships. Also at Korea's ports, the lay time for loading and unloading goods will be extended to as long as a year. To make up for the tonnage lost with Hanjin, Korea's second biggest shipper, Hyundai Merchant Marine, plans to add 4 ships on its routes to the U.S. and 9 on routes to Europe starting this coming week. Meanwhile, the Foreign Affairs and Trade Ministry will do what it can to ensure the protection of Hanjin's vessels in 43 countries around the world, where it filed for a prohibition against seizure. However, some Hanjin customers and company officials have voiced concerns whether the measures are enough, with demand set to peak ahead of the holiday retail season. Yun-seon, Arirang News.
South Korean automakers saw their lowest sales in 7 years last month. The Korea Automobile Manufacturers Association says global sales of domestically produced vehicles in August came to about 251,000, the lowest since August 2009. That's just 65% of last year's average monthly sales of 380,000. The decline was attributed to labor strikes at Hyundai, Kia and GM Korea, as well as special consumption tax cuts on new vehicle purchases that came to an end back in June. Protests against Britain's decision to leave the European Union were held across several cities in the UK over the weekend. Some 2,000 people turned out in London, while there were also demonstrations in Edinburgh and Birmingham. Prime Minister Teresa May has shown strong support for Brexit and is reportedly working on plans for the UK's future outside the EU. But after receiving a petition with over 4 million signatures for a second EU referendum, she's set to meet with members of Parliament to discuss the matter when she's back from the G20 Summit that's taking place in China. The petition was submitted before the Brexit vote and demanded another referendum if less than 60% voted for Brexit and if voter turnout was less than 75%. The vote in June met both those conditions. Scientists in Singapore have found that the Zika virus behind the outbreak in the city-state probably did not come from Brazil, but from a local strain already in Southeast Asia. Singapore's Ministry of Health says researchers sequenced the DNA of the Zika virus found in 2 local patients, and the results showed it likely evolved from a strain that's been in the region for decades. Experts welcomed the news as it could mean most locals are immune from the strain. What's more, the genetic distance from the Brazilian version would dramatically lower the risk of brain defects in infants believed to be caused by the virus. The Vatican has made Mother Teresa a saint in the Catholic Church. The canonization mass led by Pope Francis was held in St. Peter's Square with an audience of some 100,000 people. The Sisters of Charity, a religious community, provided bus rides and pizza to some 1,500 homeless people in the spirit of the saint of the slums. In India, where Mother Teresa spent much of her ministry, ceremonies were held at the Missionaries of Charity, a Catholic order founded by the late nun. She died in 1997 at age 87 and was beatified in 2003. It often takes decades to reach sainthood, but Mother Teresa's beatification was rushed through by Pope John Paul II, and Pope Francis vowed to complete the process. Ultra-high definition television, also known as UHD, is a digital video format that delivers 4 times as much detail as regular HD TV. With its advanced technology, Korea is on track to lead this market, which is set to become the next generation for TV. Park Geunhye tells us more.
When UHD TVs go on the market next February, Korea is expected to dominate, just as it has with digital TV. Korean researchers have developed key technologies for UHD broadcasts, which offer high-quality images, and they're set to become the global standard.
The domestic technology for UHD broadcasting grants us technical superiority. The technology is also expected to bring in revenue from royalties.
One of the technologies facilitates the distribution of content to multiple channels and objects. Another allows for compression of 4 times as much audio and video data as existing methods. Both technologies will be essential to the latest mobile TV and digital multimedia broadcasting services that allow users to stream programs and podcasts on their phones and other devices, no matter where they are.
Improved UHD content can be watched indoors, and anyone traveling at over 100 kilometers an hour can have access to full HD video.
The key technologies are expected to be applied to the next generation of our televisions, opening new opportunities for the related local industries. Park Se-young, Arirang News.
Well, that's all we have for now on this Monday morning here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broom. Thank you as always for watching. We are going to be back throughout the day with more newscasts. Our next scheduled bulletin is coming up at 10 a.m. Korea time, a little under 4 hours from now. So until then, goodbye.